I think if I had called GlobalPro, or if I even knew to call GlobalPro first, I think I would have had a much better outcome, to be honest. State of mind was sheer frustration and panic. Imagine smoke blowing out of your ears. That was the state of mind. Just finished an 18-month nightmare renovation. Lying, stealing, cheating. That was the renovation team. We moved in, we set up our home, our kids had our bedrooms all set, all the covers were on the beds, everything was nice. We went to paint, pulled off the frame of the doorway, and the painter said, hey, you have mold. How can we have mold? This is a brand new apartment. It's like 8 weeks old. How could we have mold? Turns out the contractor hired a sub who, instead of looking with his eyes that there was a massive pipe, a sewage pipe of the building, he took the drywall, ignored the pipe, and drilled 2 set screws into the sewage line of the building, which means that every time someone above me flushes their toilet, their stuff goes in, seeping underneath my wood floors. And in our building, there's a very, very big, thick sound barrier, which also worked as a special sponge, absorbing all this crap from all the floors above. So, over the course of 4 months, essentially, every time someone flushed, it would spread further and further and further into the floor, subfloor of my apartment, unbeknownst to us. And my daughter, whose room was ground zero, kept coming out saying, Mommy, I have flies. I have a fly problem. I said, Izzy, it's a brand new apartment. You're fine. There's no flies. Mom, it smells in my room. Izzy, it's a brand new apartment. Stop harassing me. It's fine. Come to find out, the mold was an outcropping of the poop from all the stories above me every time they flushed for the last few months. So my entire floor, subfloor, was covered from almost apartment end to end of the apartment with other people's feces. So essentially, the corrosive nature of the stuff that had filtered into my apartment, the sewage, had actually eaten the studs of all the brand new framing inside the walls. So this stuff is corrosive. It is bad. It ate everything. It's like Pac-Man. There was nothing left. So we had to cut out all the walls in about 90% of the apartment. Brand new walls. We moved in March 1st. We found this July 30th. In that time, everything had been destroyed. So we hired what's it called? A mold remediation company. This guy came out and he had his whole garb and mask, and they sealed the place off, and essentially they cut everything out. We started from zero. So the floors had to be dried professionally. In the meantime, I have steam coming out of my ears, and I couldn't even grasp the size of the problem, because every day I would go in and they would have to, oh, we found more. They'd cut another, I mean, even to the point to the very back of the apartment, we have a washer dryer room in the back. Even that, they said, well, it's probably okay. I said, no, let's move the washer dryer, lift the floors. It was all the way back there. The entire apartment, except for a very little area, was destroyed. My biggest concern was, how did this happen? And did we find the problem? Because I was worried, well, what if it's not just this? What if it's something else? So once we were sure we found the problem, which took a number of weeks, then the question was, where are we gonna live? Because we all had to move out. We had nowhere to live. My kid had just started school, and we were basically living out of our car at this point. So we rented an Airbnb, and that was a terrible experience. Then we moved to the East Hotel, and that was bleeding me dry. And we have a rental, which I had already rented. So we literally had nowhere to live. So we had to wait 8 weeks to be able to move back into a rental apartment. And the whole thing took about 4.5 months. And we had to rebuild the kitchen, the brand new kitchen. We had to put a new island in. The island was like 8 weeks old. We had to rip it out and start all over again. So the first concern was, did we find the leak? The second concern was, where are we gonna live? The third concern was, who's responsible for this? And then the fourth concern was, we just started hemorrhaging money, because before we could even get our hands on the size of the problem, we were already into it for $50,000, $60,000. Like, by the time you do the remediation and find a place to live, it's 50 grand. And you haven't even ripped out of anything at this point. So then I said to someone, who do I call for this? Like, how do I handle this? First, I called a lawyer. Massive mistake with that. Because of course, the lawyer's motivation is very different than mine. He's fine with running up the hours with no positive outcome for me. He has no problem with that. It is not a win-win. Our motivations are not aligned. So I didn't want to go that route. And I said, are there any other options? And somebody said, you could get a public adjuster. So I said, what's a public adjuster? I've never heard of that. I never lived in Florida. I own real estate, but I've never had this situation before. This sounded like a much better idea to me. A public adjuster sounded perfect because our motivations were in line. An attorney just bills me. A public adjuster takes a percentage of the recovered fund. So this seemed like a much better option for me. So I didn't have to put money out. And if they believed I had a strong case, they'd be willing to invest their time in return for a piece of the upside if I recovered money. So this is how I found GlobalPro. Several owners in my building had used GlobalPro and had very good experience, had been able to recuperate funds after floods or other problems, disasters. When I made the first call to GlobalPro, Dan came over, immediately responded to my phone call, met me within a day or two, and brought a couple of people from his team. They went through the apartment, they quickly assessed the damage, and they were very positive and they could address who was the responsible party, which in my case took a lot of digging, but GlobalPro stayed with us the entire process. It was almost a year, but we did recuperate funds because clearly there was negligence. So GlobalPro really had the resources, expertise, and the manpower to dig through all of the details. And there were a lot of details involved in trying to win a successful outcome. I think that we made a mistake by not calling GlobalPro the very first phone call. Our very first phone call was our insurance company. As it turns out, was a mistake. I think our very first phone call should have been to GlobalPro to assess the damage and help us manage the insurance company, because the adjuster came out and by then the horse had left the barn. And so I think if I had called GlobalPro, or if I even knew to call GlobalPro first, I think I would have had a much better outcome, to be honest. The level of communication with GlobalPro was terrific. Victor was my main contact. He gave me his cell phone number. He responded either immediately or within a few hours. Farah was on every single detail. I could call her to check in. I could send her piles of documentation and she would organize it in a way and an order that the insurance companies were used to seeing. Everything that I fed GlobalPro, they just digested it into little bite-sized pieces that made the process easier and faster. I think what GlobalPro tried to do was negotiate something with my insurance company, but again, because I called them first, the horse had already left the barn. The appraiser had already come to my apartment and had already made his own judgment in his mind on how he was going to handle my case. Had I called GlobalPro first, they would have been there with the appraiser to point out the extensive damage. I think the process went really well. Once we provided all of the reams of information, we had about 18 inches of documentation, maybe more, because my building kept a paper trail of every single person that entered the building, and we needed that to build the case. So I just delivered reams of paper and GlobalPro went through it. I don't really know what happened after that, and I would just check in with GlobalPro. I would say if you have any problems at all, call GlobalPro first and call your insurance company second. That should be the order. GlobalPro and then your insurance company. You have a much better outcome.